last time when we were introducing this webinar series. This is a joint and collaborative initiative between the University of the Free State and several other partner universities in Southern Africa. Today is very special because we have a speaker and the chair from our partner institution at the University of Zambia. Before we get started and before I hand over to the chair, I would just like to remind all of you to keep your microphones on mute, especially while our presenter is talking. There will be an opportunity for you to unmute your mics and ask questions towards the end of the session. You're also welcome to type your observations, your comments, any questions that you might have in the chat. These will be addressed during the Q&A, and the chair will do his best to make sure that all of the questions are addressed. I think that's it from me, from my part. I will now introduce Dr. Kapambwe Mwelwa, who is the chair for this afternoon's session. Over to you, Dr. Mwelwa.
Thank you so much, Professor Mika, for this opportunity to chair this important session this afternoon. And so this afternoon, I have the opportunity to introduce our presenter from Zambia, Professor Ferdinand Chipindi. Professor Ferdinand Mwaka Chipindi is a respected academic leader, a post-colonial critic, and a defiant scholar with over 18 years of service in higher education in Zambia. Currently is an associate professor in the Department of Education Administration and Policy Studies at the University of Zambia. He is known for challenging inherited academic orthodoxies and advocating for epistemic disobedience in both research and teaching. Professor Chipindi also earned his PhD from the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities in the United States of America. He specialized in organizational leadership, policy, and development, with minors in development studies and social change. His scholarship consistently interrogates the legacies of colonial knowledge systems, and his teaching centers African intellectual traditions, radical pedagogy, and institutional critique. He has published widely, consulted on national education policy, and he has mentored scores of early academics at the University of Zambia and elsewhere. His teaching methodology course has become a site of intellectual insurgency, empowering lecturers to decolonize their practice. Professor Chipindi is also recognized for his integrity, critical voice, and visionary leadership. Please join me in welcoming our presenter to this important webinar, that is Professor Mwaka Chipindi. And today, this afternoon, is presenting to us the presentation that he has themed Epistemic Uprising, Africanizing Doctoral Education, and Reclaiming the Intellectual Soul of the University. Please join me in welcoming Professor Chipindi. Professor Chipindi, you have the opportunity now to share your insights with us, and you have 30 to 40 minutes, and after that, we will have the Q&A session. Over to you, please, Professor Chipindi.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon, colleagues. It gives me much pleasure to be able to, have this conversation. Special thanks to Professor Mikateko for convening this dialogue, and also colleagues joining us from other universities. I had hoped for a slightly longer time allocation, but anyway, I'll make do with what I have. So I wish to speak today about epistemic uprisings. Let me just a minute. I think I'm stuck somewhere. Yes, epistemic uprisings, project of...
While you become unstuck, let me just remind you that you can take your time, and please do. Please take your time. So the allocation isn't strict.
Okay.
If you need more time, please use it. Okay.
Sure. He can take his time. Please go ahead, Prof.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So the idea is that the current configuration of global, doctoral education models is such that the doctorate, the end doctorate is seen as the pinnacle of the intellectual achievement, a rite of passage, if you like, of intellectual, an intellectual journey into the world of knowledge production, transitioning from consumption into, a production of knowledge and scholarly authority. Yet within the African context, this journey has historically been fraught with contradiction. The first contradiction is that the very degree that promises intellectual emancipation for the holders of this highly coveted qualification is often rooted in systems that reproduce epistemic subordination. Historically, the African university as we know it, or at least in its present configuration as it has emerged over the past several couple of decades, was not built per se to serve local epistemic needs. It was structured as a colonial outpost, transmitting metropolitan thought and marginalizing intellectual traditions. As a result, doctoral education has tended over the years to persistently reward mimicry, privileging Eurocentric theories, foreign methodologies, and Western academic standards, while rendering African thought peripheral. To pursue a doctorate in Africa today is to enter an epistemic battlefield. One must navigate this battlefield by transacting the tensions between institutional recognition and the deeper desire for intellectual sovereignty. What we face today is not just a crisis of pedagogy, but a deeper phenomenon of what some scholars have called epistemicide, the systemic erasure of local ways of knowing. My presentation this afternoon argues that in order to redress this epistemicide, it is imperative for us to wage a war that goes beyond reform. I think to craft it as a counter-revolution would be an understatement. We must radically reimagine doctoral education as a space of epistemic liberation through defiant scholarship, epistemic obedience, centering of African voices, and so on and so forth in the scholarship. The doctorate should not merely, certify academic competence, but rather serve as an insurgent act, a reclaiming of voice, a reclaiming of theory, and a reclaiming of thought rooted in our realities and cultures. This brings me squarely to the root of the problem, the coloniality of the academy. The coloniality and the crisis of epistemic dependence. We need now to confront the deeper crisis that is shaping the doctoral model of education in Africa. This is not merely a curricular problem or a problem of a curriculum. It is a structural epistemic crisis, what somebody has called the crisis of coloniality. Coloniality refers to the enduring patterns of power relations emanating obviously from the colonial encounter, but these relations have these patterns have endured over time, structuring the power relations, the knowledge, and the concept of being. And these persist long after colonial administration or political occupation has formally ended. It is not an event, coloniality that is, it is not an event of the past. It continues up to the present. The idea is coloniality manifests itself in our academic space through a deep dependence on Eurocentric canons or the Anglo-American episteme and how it structures how conversations are carried out. It controls whose knowledge gets counted, whose worldview dominates, and whose experiences are intelligible. In many African doctoral programs, this coloniality manifests through a deep dependence on Eurocentric canons, the so-called foundational texts that present themselves as a naturalized set of knowledge. You also have the classic theories in different disciplines. In administration and management, we have classical thought, which is treated as classical thought of management, treated as the foundation, as sort of I struggle to find the word that captures its centrality to the discipline, to our field of study, or the so-called core readings. All too often, these reflect the intellectual traditions of the global north, and yet the way they manifest in the classroom space, in the academic space, in the research scenario, is such that they present themselves as naturalized, as if they have come from nowhere. They've just appeared in the space and they're neutrally objective. They are presented as universal, as if context, history, and geography were irrelevant. Meanwhile, African knowledge systems, which are rooted in oral traditions, spirituality, indigenous philosophy, and communal cosmologies, are pushed to the margins. They are deemed local, anecdotal, or unscientific, or outrightly unintelligent. And this persists the present. This exclusion is not only epistemic, it is in fact ontological. When African doctoral students are compelled to justify their methods through northern frameworks, global north frameworks, and when they are warned not to over-Africanize their proposals in the name of academic objectivity, the doctorate ceases to be a space of discovery. It becomes a ritual of intellectual intellectual domestication. So we raise deeper questions with this type of exclusion. And the questions are, who is permitted to produce knowledge? And by what parameters do they produce that knowledge? Or do they make that determination of producing that knowledge? Whose methods are valid and sufficiently scientific or intelligible? Whose realities are seen as theoretical rather than just experiential? These are questions that strike deep at the conversation that we are having this morning, this afternoon. Apologies. Doctoral education functions in its current configuration as a crucible of ideas, more as a disciplinary apparatus, shaping what questions may be asked, how they may be asked, and what counts as legitimate as a legitimate answer. As Foucault reminds us, power is not only coercive, it operates through the very shaping of discourse. So the crisis we are confronting is not just a crisis of knowledge. It is a crisis of discursive sovereignty, the power to name, the power to define, the power to determine the terms of scholarly legitimacy. These are the issues at the center of the epistemicide that we must confront in doctoral education. And some scholars have crafted this as issue of double consciousness, double consciousness. Many of our students and even supervisors, especially right here at this institution, which happens to be the flagship institution, the highest learning institution in the land, oldest also, and the biggest by far. We, together with our students, inhabit a space that Du Bois called double consciousness. We, I was going to say they, well, let me say we are intellectually split between the realities of our context and the paradigms of academic respectability. Ngongi Wathio, calls this the colonization of the mind, where African thought must be translated into the idioms of the West in order to be taken seriously. In Zambia, we have a local delicacy called the Chikanda. Chikanda. I don't know, I think it might exist elsewhere. So this is a very delicious meal that is made from groundnuts and some form of a tuber, African tuber. Now, it's interesting that in order for this sort of food to be appreciated by the palate in the global north, it has to acquire a certain name, and so it transitions from becoming a Chikanda to becoming a African polony. African polony, and you have, you know, plants that undergo a similar translation in order to gain legitimacy. So African thought must first be translated into the idioms of the West or the global North in order to be taken seriously. So what this means is that we have an internalized inferiority, which is subtle and dangerous. These are both consequences of coloniality. It robs us of the right to theorize our own from our own geographies of reason, and asks us to transform ourselves in order to fit the Anglo-American epistemic parallel. It ensures that Africa remains a consumer, not a producer of knowledge. What we need, therefore, ladies and gentlemen, is not reform. What we need is rupture, because reform has been ongoing. We have spoken very big about the need to delink from the canon and so on and so forth. I think we are at a point where action now must take on the form of rupture. What we need, therefore, is rupture, a radical reimagination of the university as a space for epistemic justice and continental regeneration. We have to think about what really needs to change in the structure of knowledge. That rupture begins with a powerful imperative: epistemic sovereignty. Epistemic sovereignty is the right and responsibility of African scholars to define the terms of knowledge. Not only what we study, but how we study it. This is not about isolationism or romanticizing indigeneity, as is often presented. Because some people, when you present a decolonial thought, some people will say, are you then implying that we should go back to, you know, I don't know, they find some derogatory term to describe our distant past. So are you suggesting that we should stop using laptops and go back? So all these are pointing to a very, very problematic misunderstanding of who we truly are. So it's not about romanticizing, it's about dismantling the hierarchies that present the foreign as superior and the local as backward. As somebody reminds us, African scholarship has been reactive, interpreting ideas from elsewhere. We must now become the originators and conceptual frameworks, the originators of conceptual frameworks, of theory. We must be the authority that occupies the central space in that classroom. We must be theorists in our own right. This means reclaiming African philosophical traditions, not as supplements to Western theory, but as primary sources of critique, imagination, and method. This means thinking in African categories, not simply translating American terms into African contexts, but rather building theory from within Africa, from within African metaphysics, African ethical systems and cosmologies. But this requires institutional transformation. Doctoral education must no longer be a space where African students learn to perform intellectual subservience. It must become a site of radical self-theorization. We need new evaluative frameworks, not just rubrics that reward methodological mimicry, but criteria that value contextual depth, cultural responsiveness, and ontological integrity. In doing so, we advance epistemic justice. As Miranda Africa puts it, justice in the very ways knowledge is recognized, circulated, and legitimized. Now, let me be clear. This is not a metaphorical struggle. It is a political and pedagogical imperative. And without epistemic sovereignty, the doctoral space becomes a factory or continues to be a factory of dependence. It becomes a crucible for African futures when we shift the struggle. We theorize, imagine, and build the world on our own terms and not have someone else present it for us. Let us now turn from critique to construction. Let us turn from critique to construction. And for this, I propose the DTS. If the crisis of doctoral education in Africa lies in its epistemic dependence, then its renewal must begin with structural reimagination. At the University of Zambia, we have developed what I call the Doctoral Training Suite, or DTS, a six-module curriculum designed not simply to support the writing of the thesis, but to restructure doctoral education as a holistic formation of the scholar. DTS is not just about completing the research, it is about reclaiming intellectual agency. It offers a decolonial framework rooted in epistemic sovereignty, methodological pluralism, and scholarly reflexivity. Rather than treating the doctorate as a fragmented apprenticeship dependent on the preference of a single supervisor, DTS constructs the PhD as a critically scaffolded, intellectually coherent journey. Let me talk you through the 6 modules of the doctoral framework. Am I lost?
No, you're not. There was at times issues with the sound. It was lagging a little bit. So I'd put my hand up, but I didn't want to interrupt you. Perhaps from here on out, if you could keep your video off, that might improve the audio quality,
sound.
or at least strengthen the connection a bit. Yeah. So if you can just keep your video off and then keep going.
Excellent. Thank you, Prof. Thank you. Right. So let me talk you through the 6 modules. The first module is ontology and epistemology, which is centered around grounding the inquiry. This begins at the deepest level, the philosophical foundation. We ask, what exists? How do we know what we know? Whose realities are legitimized in research? In short, research begins not with methods, but with worldviews. This module therefore introduces students to African ontological frameworks, from communalism to animism, to process metaphysics, as well as epistemologies grounded in oral tradition, in spiritual knowing, critical realism, standpoint theory, and decolonial thought. Students are encouraged to situate their questions in the realities of African life, not in abstract Cartesian dualisms. We dislodge the myth of neutrality and make visible the worldviews that shape all scholarship. Module number 2, research design and methodological praxis. In this module, we position research design as both a structural and ethical architecture. As a structural and ethical architecture. Students are guided through the entire design process, from refining their research problem, crafting paradigm-aligned questions, and clarifying their aims, to selecting methodologies and building coherent data strategies. Design is not only a bureaucratic template, but a philosophical act. We encourage students to design research that is not only logically sound, but contextually situated. This module equips doctoral students to build projects with intellectual integrity, ensuring that every component of their design flows from a unified, reflexive, scholarly vision. Module number 3, advanced doctoral research and methodological craft. We redefine methodology as a reflection of epistemic allegiance. Students are introduced to a wide repertoire of methodologies, from indigenous story work, ancestral witnessing, and participatory inquiry, to visual ethnography and critical quantitative methods. Here, method is not a technique, it is a political act. We teach students to align their methods with their paradigms, resisting bureaucratized models that treat method as neutral. This module produces scholars who are not just technically competent, but epistemically reflexive, aware of the politics and power embedded in research practice. Module number 4, inquiry and the architecture of knowledge production. We focus on how research is not simply designed, but is imagined as well. It is structured and enacted within power-laden knowledge systems. Design becomes an act of intellectual sovereignty, a space where scholars craft coherent, contextually grounded, and ethically responsive research blueprints. Here, we reclaim research design as a political and aesthetic practice, one that reflects our values, speaks from our geographies, and answers to our communities. The students learn a number of things. They learn to frame their research questions, that emerge from African lived realities. They learn to align philosophical foundations, paradigms, and methodological choices with intellectual and ethical commitments. They learn to view research as a form of scholarly authorship, not institutional compliance. Design is reclaimed not an institutional compliance, but as a conceptual authorship. Module number 5, thesis writing and scholarly communication. In this module, we reframe writing not as an endpoint of research, but as a space of scholarly becoming. Drawing on scholars like Bell Hooks, Laurel Richardson, and Bessie Head, we explore poetic narrative and autoethnographic writing. We affirm that voice, emotion, and embodiment are not antithetical to academic rigor. They are integral to it. We also confront the politics of citation and bibliometrics. Who do we cite? Whose voices are absent from our bibliographies? Students learn to decolonize their citation practice, reclaiming African lineages of thought as primary theoretical sources, not merely footnotes to European theory. And the final module, reflexivity, ethics, and positionality. This module demands that the researcher turn the lens inward towards self, okay? We challenge the illusion of objectivity and train the scholars to examine their own identities, power positions, emotional investments, and ethical entanglements. Grounded in feminist standpoint theory, African communitarian ethics, and decolonial reflexivity, students are encouraged to see positionality as a resource, not a threat to validity, but a pathway to relational accountability. This is where we restore the full humanity of the scholar. Thus, to move from theory to practice, we have offered this doctoral training developed at the University of Zambia and presently being, licensed across several institutions. This DTS is a 6-module interdisciplinary framework, as you have seen, that frames doctoral research as a site of intellectual insurgency. And its commitments are philosophical grounding in ontology, epistemology, and axiology from both African and global traditions. Methodological pluralism, decentering or provincializing the Eurocentric or Anglo-American epistemic systems of rigor, which claim rigor. Writing as inquiry, challenging the colonial structure of the thesis as a performance. Reflexivity and positionality, recognizing that the researcher is never neutral. And recursive theorization, where the thesis is not a destination, but a dialogue. Through this suite, through the DTS, we seek to disrupt colonial architectures of knowledge production for grounding local epistemologies while remaining globally conversant. Together, these 6 modules represent more than curriculum. They are a political and pedagogical intervention. Rejects the notion that Africa's role is to catch up with the North. Instead, the DTS positions African doctoral education as a site of global theoretical innovation, a space where method, voice, ethics, and imagination converge in the service of justice. Through DTS, the university becomes something else entirely, not a colonial engine of certification, but a sanctuary of liberated thought, a place where Africa no longer waits to be studied, but studies itself. And in doing so, begins to imagine the world. I thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I was within, or anyway, the chair had given me large chair. But anyway, that's that. Thank you very much, Chair.
Wow, wow. Thank you so much, Professor Chipindi, for this insightful presentation. One would wonder how we can even summarize your presentation, but I think most of us have enjoyed your presentation, and we are yearning to ask questions and seek clarifications and make comments and see how we can ensure that doctoral education indeed does not create intellectual subservience, but indeed promote justice. Thank you so much. So at this particular point, I request those who have questions or points of clarifications, they can raise up their electronic hands and then I'll point at them and then they can ask the questions. Professor Chipindi will be ready to respond. Okay, thank you so much. We can start with the, you forgive me if I did not pronounce the name properly, but this should be Tele. You can go ahead and ask your question or make your comment.
Thank you, sir. I've just hijacked this interesting conversation. I'm actually connected from Australia and it's almost 9:30 p.m. My question to Prof is with regards to ethics for us PhD students. If we were to Africanize doctoral studies, and I think it starts with ethics, which is still Western centric or Eurocentric, how do we then also decolonize ethics within higher education system? Because it does not help us to talk about, for example, African indigenous knowledge systems that we want to infuse through our thesis. But then when we have to apply for ethics, we are confronted with ethics that is so Western, that does not accommodate African way of collecting data. I mean, in the next 2 weeks, I'll be collecting data in South Africa. I'm called a gatekeeper. In my own country, I'm coming as not as a researcher or as a researched, but as a gatekeeper.
Well, are you done, Tere, with your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Prof. Chipindi, are you ready to take on that one, or we can get another question, then you respond to two? How do you want us to do that?
Well, I mean, it's very interesting, Tele, and this is exactly our proposition, that our embeddedness into this whole, Eurocentric model is reflected in the structural elements that act as constraints against the innovation. Hence, my proposition that what we need now is not reform, but something more powerful, an insurgence, a resurgence, sort of a revolution, an intellectually violent revolution that disrupts, that does not just change the language, but disrupts the entire architecture of, for instance, ethics. We have a very, very problematic history here at my institution with ethics because of the feeling, the general feeling that some of these research ethics committee, they tend to overstep their boundaries, going into the even into the mechanics of how you are going to collect the data. So what you have, Taylor, there is a system that is ripe for complete, not for reform, but for complete overhaul, for complete disruption, for lack of a better term. Thank you, Taylor.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you so much, Prof. Tere, are you okay with the response, or you had the follow-up question on that? Okay, thank you so much. Okay, can we get to Harmony Kitoke?
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity and for the very interesting ambition and direction we are taking. My question to Professor is that one of the main strangleholds that Africa faces, and more generally the Global South faces in terms of knowledge generation, is the economic aspect that guardrails how one even gets to the field, how one publishes their work, where one publishes their work, how one even gets to the classroom in doctoral studies and progresses through their work. Talk about journals, which very few of African journals have not been labeled predatory journals because of the power structures that are within knowledge production and generation and dissemination. How does this model help to answer and address that economics question, not just in terms of the financial bits, but also structurally bringing the globe to see that Africa is a worthwhile producer of knowledge, but also in terms of the dissemination channels? Where do we find a center stage?
Prof, go ahead.
Well, thank you very much. My screen is not on, so I'm not able to.
It's Amon.
Amon, yeah, beautiful. Thank you very much, Amon. Yes, and the stranglehold, as you have put it, is quite it's quite debilitating, actually, from the publication economics, not only labeling our journals predatory, but also like people openly stating, like, for example, in my institution, the rise to professor, associate professor is, littered with, milestones that one must beat. And amongst the most problematic milestones is the issue of where do you publish? Is this Elsevier? Are you publishing in Elsevier or Taylor and Francis and so on and so on? So anyway, the DTS tries to tackle this problem from the center, right? From the soul of the university. So the idea is to try to remodel. I don't know whether we can remodel, because again, remodel, it takes away the agency from the institution. So to sort of catalyze or ignite a conversation from from inside the soul of the institution, to sort of shine some light on the optics surrounding, especially the publication metrics. So I've learned over the years to sort of, well, I wouldn't say to walk back, but to sort of moderate the expectations when you wage these sort of decolonial conversations, and learn to celebrate small wins. So the fact that DTS is adopted at one institution signals that the ground is sort of likely to give as we go, as we shine some more light on it, as it gains traction, and then it will sort of, revolutionize the soul of the institution from the inside. As you know, the doctorate is the cradle of the academic persons. And so pitching our intervention there actually also helps us, reflects our hopefulness in a systemic change that emanates from deep within the soul of the institution. I hope that is good enough, Amon.
Is that okay with you, Amon? Okay, thank you so much. Let's now move on to Dr. Paul Michael. Dr. Paul Michael, you can make comments.
Thank you very much. The presenter, I want to thank you because I agree fully with your presentation. But I want to also ask if you are calling for severance from Western epistemologies. And this is because if that is what you are calling for, it's we will also be guilty of what Eurocentric epistemology has done by trying to say that the epistemology is Eurocentric and that other epistemologies are non-existent. sense. But I will not fully agree with that if because of the kind of words you use, like rupture and then the tone. I feel that we should be a little bit more flexible. We should, while we try to establish epistemologies for indigenous knowledge system and growth, we should also be a little bit eclectic in nature, given the argument for interculturality. Thank you.
Mhm. Excellent, excellent. And I mean, so this is actually the point of decolonization as it is being framed here. Is not a call to return to the distant past or to discard entirely the Eurocentric models or epistemologies. It is rather to forge a dialogue between these frameworks, so that we can sort of have a conversation, a sort of hybrid that takes on positive elements from all the epistemologies. So I must apologize also for the language. Sometimes the language can cross the line, can cross the boundary, and and sort of sell the struggle short. But the intention, Prof, is not entirely to sort of discard the canon, but sort of to bring a dialogue, that elevates, because the Western canon has, sort of evolved itself in this epistemicide, complete erasure of, what are regarded as inferior frameworks. And if we are to propose as a counter to that, if we are to propose the exact opposite, then we're just as guilty as the Eurocentric canon, as you have correctly put it, Doc. Thank you very much.
Okay. Doc, is that okay with you? Michael?
Sure.
Okay, thank you so much. We can now move on. We can come to Caroline. Caroline, you can go ahead with your question or comment.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your insightful presentation. I'm Caroline from Kenya. I ask my question with regard to the politics of citation, knowing too well that the epistemological thought, the African epistemological thought is missing. Because if we are to rely on the indigenous knowledge systems, we know the bias that already exists. We are given the standards of citation, and our knowledge systems were passed through oral traditions. How then do we convincingly Africanize our citation systems, knowing that even though the knowledge existed, it cannot be authenticated because of the fact that it was passed down through oral traditions. And we know there is that bias, since the Eurocentric epistemologies already are pre-written, they recorded, but omitted the African thought. How do we navigate that? Thank you.
Excellent. What a beautiful question. And indeed, so actually part of the gist of the argument, the counter argument of the issue of epistemology, is the erroneous conceptualization that appears to present the orality of African, epistemology as inferior, actually, right? As inferior to a written source. Whose eyes are we using? Which lens are we using to make that determination? In the DTS, I think the inclination is to argue that, orality is not necessarily an inferior sort of epistemology. This conceptualization is, in fact, part of the core outcomes of, epistemic violence of the Anglo-American episteme. So the conceptualization being proposed here is that we are hoping to unleash a cadre of decolonized doctoral scholars who recognize that their orality is in fact a source of legitimate knowledge, because those are the conversations we're having in class regarding which knowledge counts as legitimate and not, and why not. And so demystifying the myth of the inferiority of orality is a crucial aspect of this conversation. And so we're going to reconceptualize the orality. If the oral source, if the doctoral student comes across an oral source, I always ask my students in class, and this question I ask it every time, to say, who is more educated between myself, I, Ferdinand, an associate professor at the institution at the University of Zambia, with a PhD from one of the best universities on earth, and my 94-year-old grandmother. And my students always say, well, you are educated because you have the papers. And then I find this response quite intriguing, because I don't think it is correct. How could I be more educated than the woman that gave birth to my mother and raised her, right? And raised her into womanhood. And she was there when I was born. How can she be less educated than I, who has spent a couple of years in a formal, and I'm using quotation, in a formal education system, and spent 4 years in the US and come back speaking the foreign language with fluency? How could I be more educated than this woman who has seen 90 years who has spent 90 years of her life, including 40 years of those watching over me every day? It is very, very troubling. So the orality is part of the bone of contention. That's why we shall shift the conversation more forcefully, actually. I hope that is to your satisfaction.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Chipindi. I think in our chat box, we have a comment from, is it Fanela? Fanela says, thank you for the presentation. Could you give us an example of a thesis that has been produced through this training suite to show what it looks like, the topic, process, the final output, and how it was evaluated? Your comment on this, Professor Chipindi?
Yes. Well, so the rollout, I wish I had spoken a bit more about it. So the rollout of this, so this doctoral training suite has been developed for the past 10 years, right? It started with my own doctoral education, where I was exposed to coursework, and coursework in the doctoral studies, like many of you, I think many of the doctors and professors here have similarly undergone, a similar type of training, which provoked me to think about how to domesticate a model that helps to scaffold the doctoral process with a structured conversation around the sort of things that you're, conversing. And so in terms of the timelines, I think we had to move back and forth, because in the initial conceptualization, we were to seek, as usual, a partnership with a Global North institution to help us to roll out these. But in the process, I think it was overtaken by events. And the first rollout of this doctoral program occurs, if I'm not very, if I'm missing a few years, I think we are yet to actually have, I think this year we could get to the point of maybe having a graduate on the program. So as of now, we shall treat it as ongoing work. We are unable to produce a fully executed study that has been conceptualized through this model. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I think even myself as chair, I'm allowed to ask questions before others can do. Professor Chipindi, we appreciate your presentation. I would like to find out from you, how can we promote agency in higher education institutions or universities, including individual academics who participate in offering doctoral education, to ensure that this doctoral suit DTS you are talking about is actually implemented and does not merely remain on the paper or just on a conversation like this one we are having? How do we intend to ensure that the entire African continent can buy into this so that it can become a reality? Because indeed, we want to promote intellectual justice and the epistemic justice that you are talking about. A comment on that, Prof.
Excellent. So the timeline from where I'm seated, I'm standing or fighting from, the timeline looks like if the immediate ambition is to roll out the doctoral program continent-wide, the African continent, then we risk, I think, becoming cosmetic or academic. I think the best, I love the question about who has produced, can we have a model, an example of a doctoral thesis that has been produced like this? So I think those are the crucial starting points. Can we actually produce one doctoral student who has, undergone this kind of model of doctoral education, and then sort of we can roll it out. I have, I think, a number of conversations with a number of institutions, particularly in the local context, that have expressed a desire to adopt. So the starting point is, so tell us about this thing. How do we go about it? What are the optics? What are the stages? So we're going to, cultivate, we're going to execute this model through a sort of moderated incremental type of rollout, which lends to celebrate small wins, even just to have this conversation at an international event such as this one. This is most heartwarming. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you so much, Prof. We can have Professor Mika make a comment or question, then we'll come to Tele again. Prof. Mika, over to you.
Thank you, and thanks for your presentation and your talk, Prof. Chipindi. I was wondering if any of the institutions you've partnered with offer the DTS program themselves. So are any of the institutions you partner with, particularly those outside of Africa, do any of those institutions offer this program? And then I'm interested in hearing more about things you mentioned around indigenous story work and ancestral witnessing, and how assessment for the kind of assignments and or assignments, or when people do that, how do you then assess it? So are you thinking about assessments also looking different and having this decolonial imperative as well? Thanks.
Exactly, because I mean, if we are to, if we discard the eyes, the lens, the framework that is structuring the doctoral conversation right now, it means even the evaluation or assessment mechanisms have to sort of not to go out of the window, but have to accommodate this extra, so exciting angle from which we are looking at things. So issues like story work, or when the University of Zambia introduced an intangible, quite related to DTS, they introduced a degree, I think a degree program in intangible cultural heritage. I think the social media exploded in Zambia, accusing the university of introducing witchcraft as a study. And I think there was a lot of work done to sort of demystify the the subject intangible cultural heritage. Well, to try to put it into context. But I think what is more important is how the public reacts to it. So in terms of assessment, Prof, of the different, we're talking about pluralism, right? So the pluralism extends not only to the ways of knowing, but also in the ways of assessing, to respect the enormous diversity that exists in different, frames of research, particularly those that have not yet been brought into the mainstream, and forgive my language, into the mainstream academic discourse. Regarding whether other institutions that we have partnered in, well, the other institutions, they offer a model of, I think we have a partnership with American universities that offer, a model of doctoral training, but I think the point of similarity with our DTS is the fact that it has structured coursework. I think the unique value proposition of DTS is its focus on decolonial, so on decolonizing sort of the process. So I think that's the blueprint that we are trying to sort of roll out, a focus more on what has not been done before, or what has not been fully implemented. So especially outside of our country, outside of the continent. With regards to within, I think University of Zambia is providing the steerage in this territory. So the other institutions are sort of coming on board, and they are happy, I think, to adapt aspects of it that that appeal to them. But again, it's about how we package the message. It comes down to how we package the message. That's what's going to be the determining factor. Thank you, Prof. Mika.
Prof. Mika, are you okay with the response? Okay, thank you so much. Tere, I can see your hand is up. You can go again if you have a question or comment.
I lost track. I actually wanted to come in to my sister there from Kenya who was asking about orality.
Okay.
Prof has responded, but I wanted to say it starts with us also as African scholars. To be confident in exploring African epistemology. Currently, I'm a PhD student, and I'm looking at inclusive practices for students with disabilities in rural South African universities. And I'll be using Ubuntu as a theoretical framework. And in terms of my methodology, I will be using oral conversation. So this is what we call interviews, but I'm not mentioning interviews in my thesis at all. And I'll be going to 2 universities in South Africa that are situated in rural communities. And these we have indigenous students. So I will be working closely with research assistants who are using languages like Chivenda, Sizulu, Sepedi, and so forth, because my interest is to understand disability from the African perspective, from the indigenous perspective, not necessarily how it is being conceptualized already. And to do that, you need to use the language that the participants are comfortable with. So it's possible. And in addition to that, I also wanted to reach out to Prof to find out if some of us are interested to come to Zambia to learn more about African epistemology. What are the chances of organizing such trips?
Well, I mean, very few things are more delicious than, at the moment, a scholar reaching out to sort of, I think it's not even a matter of possibility. That is our calling. If there's test for this type of conversation, we shall create the space. We might be constrained in terms of maybe the resources, but I think if there's a desire to get to know more about this, or to even to help us to build a better, to package the whole framework better, that is actually very, very, very much part of the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Chipindi. I think Tele's question is speaking to what Amon was talking about, raising an economic question, which constrains most of us in Africa here. Thank you so much for that. You can already see, Professor Chipindi, that Tele is trying to follow what you are talking about in Africanizing research. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, excellent. Let me in fact commend Terry for that. You know, and yes, you don't call it an interview, you call it, you know, and a focus group no longer is a focus group. You have, you know, a more creative way of capturing, you know, the spirit of that space, you know, yearning circles and all those things, you know. Pluralism, I think, is the idea here. Thank you very much, you know, Terry.
There's an additional question from Fenela, trying to find out what is the supervision process. That do supervisors also go through some form of training before they can participate on the DTS, doctoral training suite? A comment from you, Prof?
In fact, the supervision package is completely, I mean, it's an entire conversation on its own, because that is where, given our doctoral model of our colonially, sorry for lack of a better term, colonially bequeathed models of doctoral training, the supervisor actually is the center of that conversation. Who actually, the thesis writing is supervisor-centered, supervisor-led. That is actually one of the aspects of the current system that is most in need of decolonization. And so we have a package, well, not expressed as a separate standalone package, but embedded within the DTS, the supervisor is actually held to account, and is the target, in fact, of the simultaneous transformation that is shaping both sides of the conversation, the student and the supervisor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Prof. We still have some minutes. Are there any questions or comments on the presentation? Or we are now okay, satisfied with the responses that have been given by Professor? Yes, someone can go ahead.
Yes, my question is on the place of local community actors. Of course, the doctoral journey is normatively perceived to be mostly a conversation between the supervisor and the doctoral student, primarily. And if there is going to be an authentically situated conversation, my question is how the conversation expands, and in what mode it expands beyond this dialogue between the doctoral committee, if there is one, but primarily the supervisor and the doctoral student. And how is what are the entry points for the different actors who may be the bearers of the knowledge, whether communally owned or maybe the knowledge of individuals in the local communities?
Excellent. And so, I don't know whether we might have not have captured this aspect, where we are saying that in terms of reflexivity, I think we are asking the researcher, the doctoral researcher, to turn the gaze inward. That is, to be aware, right, of themselves and their positionality in the conversation. So the idea of the objective researcher going out into the community. We call it studying downwards, studying down. So the researcher operates under the assumption that they are superior than the people that they're going to study. But in DTS, we are saying, wait a minute, this might not necessarily be the case. And if, for instance, you're going to research, and the possibilities, once the conversation is in full swing, I imagine that, for instance, I want to study the praise poetry of, a certain nation, a certain group, ethnic group, for lack of a better term, and all these are, terms that we are problematizing. So the researcher rethinks his position or approaches the field with a different sort of, first of all, the humility and readiness to sort of be educated by those people that traditionally are treated as the objects of your research. They become the subjects of the research. They become agentic actors that can structure the conversation either way. As you heard from a colleague who said that he's going to use methodologies that have not been tried before. I don't imagine that it's the same sort of relationship that exists with the researcher as again, lack of a better term, the conventional situation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. We have Dr. Paul Michael. Amon, are you okay with the response from Prof. Chipindi, or you have anything else to add? Okay, thank you. Dr. Paul Michael, you can go ahead, please.
Thank you. This question again flows from the earlier one. I don't know what Professor Chipindi is thinking about, what his thought will be about certain cultural challenges we have in Africa that may slow down this move that you are advocating. For instance, you mentioned that the model that your university develops is supervisor center, and I have a little problem, and I want to relate that with the fact that in Africa we already battle in traditional African system, which we often speak about. We battle with the question of young people conceding to old elders, and then it's a sign of respect. We also battle with the fact of communalism, where we emphasize, we prize communalism, and then some. But there is an inherent challenge with that, because it also slows down individual creativity. Okay, so how do we reconcile all of these in this new advocacy for an indigenous non? How do we overcome this threat, and how do we move forward? Thank you.
It's excellent. That's a beautiful question that actually demands a thorough, engagement, actually far beyond this webinar. But let me just state that indeed, it's the African, the African cosmology, the structure of the African society. My son doesn't talk to me, doesn't address me whilst standing up, and so I think the idea is how do we unleash this decolonized, sort of defiant, epistemically disobedient scholar without necessarily rattling the fabric of Africanhood that has a certain sort of orientation in the relationships that elders have with younger children, younger scholars, younger stakeholders, right? And so in the doctoral journey itself, the supervisor is not only the center of the doctoral relationship, is also a parent, is a father, and it's a beautiful thing actually in African context, where we refer to all those who are senior. We look at their age and we say, okay, this is my mother, this is my father, and the doctoral relationship persists. But if I can flip this question, I have the chair here, Dr. Mwerwa, is a much younger than me scholar, and he can find himself supervising someone who is maybe older than him. What are the relations? What are the dynamics in that type of relationship? Is it still, do you address your student as a parent? And so on and so forth. So those are the exciting nuances, that we have to sort of navigate as we roll out and as we grapple with a terrain that is only now emerging. But it's a very, very important provocation that I think I want to take up very seriously beyond this webinar. Thank you very much, Doc.
Okay, thank you so much. Dr. Paul Michael, are you okay with the response?
Okay, I'll start the conversation with him later.
Okay, thank you so much. So, Professor Chipindi, Judith Sikala has posted something in our chat box there. Probably maybe this could be one of those questions that we can be concluding with. The comment begins, just my thought that African universities must find a path that affirms their knowledge systems while remaining globally relevant, institutionally resilient, and intellectually pluralistic. The question is, where do we begin from and how?
That start to, well, not to be overly simplistic in the response, but I think the idea is to start where you are and use what you can and what you have, because the conversation is, I don't think we will say it has just begun. Decolonizing the mind, I think, has been with us a while. And I think the work ahead of us, I always tell my younger audiences that I imagine that there will come a time when this decolonization of the mind will be sort of fully entrenched in our systems. But I'm open to the fact that I may not be alive when that happens. It might not happen in my lifetime, but that does not mean that I cannot do the sped work that demands to be done, that needs to be done. So the idea is to treasure and celebrate every step of the way that we take, no matter how small the victory, even if you're just moving from one point to another, as long as we are moving in the right direction, it all will be well. And we must be open to the fact that I am personally open that I know that there will be a time when most people will see things differently from the way they do it, from the way they see them now. And I don't actually care whether I'll be alive or not by then. But I think what is important is to get started. I hope that is to the satisfaction of my colleague who has asked this beautiful question.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Chipindi. It appears being a decolonial scholar is really a lonely journey. And I think from the conversation, it appears we should be talking much more about maybe integrating African philosophies and the Western philosophies and not merely doing away with the other. Maybe embedding the two could be the conversation. Otherwise, thank you so much, Professor Chipindi. It appears we don't have any more questions. And at this particular point in time, we have 10 minutes remaining. I can now hand over back to Professor Mika. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Mwalwa, for excellent chairing, and then also a huge thank you to our speaker for today, Professor Ferdinand Chipindi. I thoroughly enjoyed your talk, and I'm very curious to see how the program continues to be rolled out, and you know, what the outcomes are going to be for those who have the opportunity to study the DTS. So thank you, and thank you all for joining us. Please do join us for the third installment, which will be on the 29th of October, where we have our third webinar in the Research Alliance for Higher Education in Africa. Our presenter will be Professor Ken Ndala from the University of Malawi. He'll be talking to us about knowledge and skills for human development in Malawi. So if you've enjoyed or learned from the first two installments, and that sounds like something that is interesting, please join us again on the 29th of October. The invitation will be shared on social media and also via email. But once again, thank you very much to our chair for the day, and thank you, Professor Chipindi, for a wonderful talk. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you so much, audience, for the energy, the impetus that you have given us as we carried on the conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.